No one really knows who they are fated to be when they are born, and a voice wonders if witches are the same. One morning, Coco walks through the spring and drops detergent into it as she washes some clothes. She apologizes to the deer watching nearby since it was clearly scared when the spring suddenly changed color. She assures the deer that the spring will go back to normal, and soon a bright light appears in the area and the water becomes crystal clear. Coco smiles at the spring, admitting to herself that she loves watching magic. As she walks back home, she thinks about how wonderful magic is. Only witches can cast spells, while ordinary people like her can only be blessed by it. She wonders what it would be like to be a witch. In an attempt to satisfy her urge to cast a spell, she tries reciting words to transform the sheets into something that can fly. However, it is only the wind that nearly blows them away. She chases after the sheets, and when she gets hold of one, she suddenly spots a flying Pegasus carriage in the sky. The carriage lands nearby, and she decides to go down to get a better look because she has never seen one. She puts her book down as she calls out for her mother, excitedly yelling about the Pegasus carriage. She immediately opens the door, accidentally hitting Kefri, a witch. She quickly apologizes for hurting him, but Kefri insists that the fault lies with him. Her attention then shifts to several women looking at her mother's clothes. The travelers came by Pegasus carriage, so Coco becomes excited that they came to visit their shop. Because her mother is busy entertaining the other women, Coco offers to help Kefri cut a piece of the cloth he's hoping to buy. Before she does so, Coco asks her mother if she can look at the Pegasus carriage after work. Her mother is hesitant, but then Coco promises not to mention wanting to become a witch if she's given permission. Her mother sighs but allows her to go as she finishes early. Determined to get the job done fast and properly, she asks Kefri for the measurements and he hands her a paper with the instructions. She goes over to the fabrics and picks a roll. She carefully checks the measurements and starts drawing the guideline for the cut. She then swiftly cuts the cloth and notices Kefri studying how she works. Kefri takes the cloth and comments on how good her concentration and the steadiness of her hands are. He studies how clean her cut is and calls her work magic. Coco becomes flustered and tries to convince him that magic is more mysterious and impressive than what she can do. She begins talking passionately about how amazing magic is until she ends up flustered. Kefri is amused by how much she likes magic, so he asks why. Coco ends up admitting that she once attended a festival held in the castle where she met a witch named Egwene who was wearing a mask. Egwene had convinced her to buy a magical picture book. At that time, Coco didn't know what magic really was, so Egwene used magic to make images appear before her and even light up the flooring to impress her. Coco was immediately enchanted and decided to buy the book, so Egwene sold it to her and included a wand. When she showed it to her mother was disappointed. However, Coco was still talking excitedly about the discovery. Coco even told her mother that she wanted to become a witch, but her mother told her that in order to be a witch, she needed to be born with magic, which Coco wasn't. Not wanting to give up her dream, she showed her mother that she could make the ground light up where she stepped. So her mother told her that if she could keep making the ground light up all the way home, then she could probably become a witch. However, after walking a certain distance, the ground was no longer lighting up, which disappointed Coco. Coco cries as she tells the story to Kefri, who finds something suspicious about it. He tries to get more information from her, but a sudden sound causes Coco to check what is happening outside. The Pegasus seem to be panicking over something, and on the ground, the floorboard of the carriage has become detached. Coco approaches the two boys nearby, and it looks like they were the cause of the damage. Coco's mother helps them apologize to the three ladies who used the carriage, but now they have a problem since they need the carriage to reach home. Kefri studies the damage carefully and tells them that it looks like he can fix it. Noticing that people don't seem convinced, he pulls out a pointed hat and introduces himself as a witch. People begin looking relieved that someone like a witch is willing to help them. Coco immediately offers her family's workshop because she really wants to see a witch cast a spell in real life. However, instead of being able to watch, she finds herself outside the workshop. Kefri had instructed her to stay outside and make sure no one enters. She feels a little let down that she won't be able to see anything. She has always been curious about how spells are cast. She then spots the boys from earlier trying to sneak around the workshop. She notices them climbing onto the roof, and to their surprise, she climbs up as well, fully intending to get a glimpse of the magic. She pries open the hatch in the window, only to see that another set of blinds is blocking the view. The boys become disappointed and decide to give up, so they leave Coco alone on the roof. She is about to give up as well, but a strong gust of wind suddenly causes some of the sheets to fall on her. She takes a moment to gather them and bring them back, then heads down to retrieve her book. There is a small window nearby that should allow her to see inside the workshop, and she debates with herself about whether she should try peeking again. She decides it shouldn't hurt and carefully takes a peek. Inside, she sees Kefri using a pen and drawing symbols on the floorboard he is repairing. She starts to understand that you don't need a wand to cast a spell, but that magic requires drawing. He soon finishes the spell and calls out to Coco, who quickly rushes back down to her post so she won't get caught. It doesn't take long for the floorboard to be reattached to the carriage, allowing the ladies to begin their journey home. Coco and her mother also see Kifri off. Her mother admits that she is relieved that Coco did not ask to go on a journey with Kifri. She confesses that she wouldn't know how to feel since she has already lost her husband to illness. Coco insists that she will never leave her mother alone, and the two share a warm embrace at that promise. They return home and begin their dinner preparations. Though the meal is not much, they both enjoy it together, and soon they prepare to head off to bed in their separate rooms. Coco's mother is about to tell her something, but after a brief pause, she decides not to say it. They bid each other goodnight, and when Coco enters her room, she continues thinking about her mother's words. She takes out the book and the wand. She starts to pull the bottom part of the wand and notices that a pen tip is hidden inside. After seeing Kifri use magic earlier, she had a feeling that the wand was actually a pen. She studies the pages carefully and notices pentagrams drawn on them. She tears out one page, then studies the wand again. She notices there is liquid inside the crystal and tries to detach it, discovering that it is filled with ink. She dips the pen tip into the ink and begins drawing on the page, hoping she can cast a spell. Her lines are shaky at first, but she keeps drawing. After a while, she becomes more confident with her strokes, so she tries imitating one of the images shown in the book. She feels like she isn't doing a good enough job, so she moves her source of light closer to see the drawing more clearly. She manages to copy one of the images poorly and holds her breath, hoping something will happen, but nothing does. Her hopes that she could perform magic begin to crumble. She doesn't realize that the reason nothing happened is that she did not complete the circle. So when her pen accidentally blots some ink onto the page, closing the circle, something finally happens. Her pentagram lifts off the page and begins to create small fireworks in front of her. Her amazement quickly turns into excitement, and she begins dancing around the room in celebration. However, her excitement soon turns into worry when she realizes that Kifri might get angry if he finds out that she was watching him earlier. She decides that it should still be safe to try one more drawing and begins scribbling. Meanwhile, in the nearby forest, Kifri lies awake, still bothered by Coco's story. He feels that there is something more of the magical picture book that Coco had purchased. Then suddenly, he sits up as he realizes something is wrong. Back with Coco, she has just figured out how to draw fire. She hurriedly puts it out with her pillow. She then looks at the other pentagrams she made, feeling confident that she is getting better at drawing and understanding them. She realizes that if she makes bigger circles, the spell becomes stronger, and that the spell will last longer if she manages to draw neatly. She knows that drawing big and clean shapes is hard to do. She then gets an idea and lays her book on the table, placing a clear page in front of one of the images. She begins tracing the pentagram and notices that her drawing becomes more accurate. She doesn't notice something in the dark closing in on her. Before the spell can activate, Kifri suddenly grabs her and darts out of the house using his own magic. When they reach a safe distance in the sky, he demands to know what kind of spell she just drew. Coco shakily admits that she simply traced a pattern from the book. They then hear Coco's mother calling for her. When they look down, Coco desperately tries to call out to her to run as her spell is growing too big. The spell catches her mother, encasing her body in a crystal-like stone. The spell continues to grow beneath them, and Coco desperately tries to break free from Kifri's grasp, despite his protests and warnings that she has just used an evil spell. She manages to break free, but before she can hit the ground, Kifri quickly catches her and pulls her away from the spreading crystals. He darts back into the air, keeping them at a safe distance, and Coco begins apologizing, admitting that she didn't know it would come to this. Kifri explains that all witches need to cast spells are special ink and knowledge of casting seals in order to perform magic. It is a secret among witches so that nothing dangerous will happen to ordinary people. But now that she knows the truth, he says that he will need to erase her memories. Coco immediately begs him not to erase her memories because she believes she is the only one who can save her mother. She tries to reason with him, explaining that even if she does not fully understand the spell, she memorized how everything looked in the picture book. Kifri pauses, realizing that Coco might be an important factor in finding the people who are secretly selling the picture books. He's been hunting them for years and has never been able to locate them. But since Coco knows the contents of the book, she might be able to help him. He then asks Coco to confirm whether she remembers the casting seal and the page she copied. Coco recalls that there were several copies of the picture book and believes that she can save her mother if they manage to find the same book. With tears in her eyes, she begs him not to erase her memories. Kifri looks at her seriously and asks if she is capable of keeping a secret and if she is willing to learn magic. Since she is now aware of the witch's secret, she must become a witch and properly learn magic. Otherwise, he will be forced to erase her memories. The next morning, Coco wakes up and finds herself inside a Pegasus carriage. When Kifri notices that she is awake, he points out something in the distance. Coco looks at where he is pointing, and Kifri tells her that it is his atelier and the school where she will be studying. As they walk toward his place, Keyfried informs Coco that he has planned to guard briar seeds around her house. These seeds will prevent people from getting close to her old home, since it is no longer safe. Coco suddenly stops following him in the middle of his explanation, and Keyfried notices that she is shaken by the painful reminder of what happened to her mother. He pulls Coco closer so she can step inside his home, advising her not to be too harsh on herself. When they enter, soft light filters into the atelier. Keyfried uses a spell to gather water in midair so that Coco can use it to wash her face, but she becomes confused about how to use it. Keyfried suddenly remembers that Coco has no change of clothes, so he tells her to wait while he retrieves some for her. Coco feels a little uneasy being left alone. However, one of Keyfried's students, Tetia, suddenly reveals herself and introduces the spell to Coco, explaining that it is called water vapor. As Coco allows Tetia to pour the floating water into her palms, she feels her amazement for magic return. She thanks Tetia, who suddenly thanks her back. Tetia explains that she loves being thanked, and the two end up going back and forth, repeatedly thanking each other. Another student, Richie, steps in and tells Coco to ignore Tetia, explaining that she can be overwhelming. Tetia insists that she only wanted to help Coco. Coco notices that Richie is holding inks and papers and asks the two girls if they are witches. Tetia explains that they are only apprentices under Keyfried, and that she was under the impression that Coco was also his student. Coco quickly explains that she is not really a student yet, as yesterday was the first time she had ever drawn a spell. The girls exchange uneasy looks and ask her if she is the rumored outsider. They explain that a non-witch managed to cast a spell the previous day, and that the spell was a type of forbidden magic. However, the outsider was allowed to stay and become a witch's apprentice. Just then, Keyfried returns and notices that Coco is already talking with his students. He calmly tells the other girls to continue their studies in their room after finishing their morning chores. He then hands Coco a set of clothes, explaining that it is the uniform worn by his students. When Coco accepts the clothes, he promises that he will explain everything to her properly. Coco returns to his side after changing into the new clothes, and Keyfried begins explaining the history of magic. Apparently, in ancient times, magic was not considered anything special, since anyone could perform it as long as they had knowledge of magical patterns and specialized ink. Because magic was available to everyone, it eventually became a powerful tool used to wage conflict. It was during this dangerous period that many destructive spells were created. A group of individuals who rejected violence eventually came together and became witches. They created a powerful spell that could erase people's memories of magic. From then on, only people who would not use magic for evil were allowed to retain the knowledge. Ordinary people were made to believe that only witches could perform magic. Keyfried explains that every witch is extremely careful about protecting that secret, which is why the rumor about Coco learning the truth spread so quickly. Coco quietly accepts that she made a mistake in trying to uncover the secret of magic. She then asks what forbidden magic actually is. Keyfried explains that forbidden magic refers to spells created during the Age of Conflict that were officially banned on the Day of the Pact. He emphasizes that these are capable of harming people. Coco suddenly clings to him and begs him to teach her the magic she is not supposed to use. She explains that she will be too afraid to do anything if she does not understand what forbidden magic is. Keyfried kneels down to her level and gently tells her that he would not rush his students to learn about this topic. But since Coco is a special case, he has decided that she needs to understand it sooner. He then leads her toward a staircase. As they walk down the stairs together, Keyfried explains the types of forbidden magic. He says that spells that alter the human body are usually forbidden, such as transformation magic or magic that changes a person's age. Next are spells that allow teleportation without the use of proper gates or doors. Finally, he explains that any magic capable of manipulating a person's thoughts or emotions is also banned. Harming and healing others are also prohibited, but there are exceptions to the rules, and Coco manages to guess that one of those exceptions is erasing memories. Keyfried continues explaining that spells are usually used on tools. To demonstrate, he draws a simple light spell on a lamp. He then shows her a window covered with moving patterns. He carefully moves the patterns around, which activates a teleportation spell. Coco is shocked to see that beyond the window is a lake. Keyfried explains that the spell is called Windoway, which connects two round windows that share the same pattern. He then points toward a tall tower and explains that it is the Tower of Tomes. Magical books are stored and duplicated there in order to preserve knowledge. Coco suddenly feels that the picture book might be there, so she eagerly tells Keyfried to take her to the tower. However, a sea serpent suddenly appears, swimming in front of them. With a powerful flick of its tail, it sends a large wave crashing toward the portal, knocking both Keyfried and Coco down. Keyfried quickly closes the portal and explains that the creature was part of one of the 4 librarians' trials. Witches must overcome each trial in order to enter the building, so he advises Coco to study hard so she can eventually work her way there. He then looks at her with a kind smile and tells her how happy he was when she expressed that she wanted to learn magic. Kefri opens another portal, this time revealing a field of flowers. He explains that it is natural to feel fear, but there is also gentler magic that she can learn, magic that can bring happiness to people. Coco returns his smile and agrees with him, calling him her teacher for the first time. Kefri then leads her to another section of the house and knocks on a door. When no one answers, he tells her that Agate is probably not around and explains that Agate will be her roommate. He opens the door, revealing a workshop with separate bedrooms. He tells her that her bedroom is downstairs and that she should rest for now. After leaving the room, he takes out a pocket watch and uses it to contact someone. He thanks the person on the other end for allowing Coco to study under him, while also revealing that he still has no new information about the picture book. Back in the room, Coco is amazed at all the books. Suddenly, Agate appears in midair and informs Coco that the desk she is looking at belongs to her side of the room and that Coco is currently preventing her from landing. Coco quickly moves aside so Agate can land properly. Coco tries to introduce herself, but Agate immediately tells her that she already knows that she is the outsider mentioned in the rumors. Agate then apologizes for what happened to Coco's mother, but bluntly states that because of the magic Coco performed, her mother may never return to being human. Coco quickly tries to defend herself. In response, Agate suddenly shows Coco her darkening fingers, explaining that the discoloration comes from years of drawing casting seals since she was young. She insists that, unlike the rest of them, Coco cannot become a witch so easily because they have spent years training and facing trials even before becoming apprentices. Coco points out that she has already drawn spells before. Hearing this, Agate decides to issue a test for her the following day. But before they can properly discuss the rules, Tetia and Richie suddenly appear by the door, inviting the two girls to dinner since they will be celebrating Coco's welcome to the atelier. However, when they arrive at the dinner table, they are met only with their usual meal of soup and bread. Tetia looks confused and asks why they are not celebrating. Kefri calmly explains that Coco's arrival happened at the last minute, so he plans to prepare a proper celebration on another day. He then asks where Agate is, mentioning that he was hoping she would join them for dinner more often. He gently encourages the other girls to start eating. Coco takes a bite of the bread and is immediately amazed by how delicious it tastes. Tetia proudly tells her that they baked the bread themselves, and Richie adds that Kefri is a very good cook. Kefri credits the locally grown wheat. When Coco takes a spoonful of the soup, she finds it just as amazing and looks toward Kefri. He smiles and once more credits the fresh vegetables. Later that evening, as Coco prepares for bed, she quietly remembers her mother. The next morning, she sits at her desk, wondering what kind of test she will need to complete. She begins searching through a book, hoping to find answers. Kefri soon finds her reading and gently tells her that it is often better for Coco to learn through experience rather than relying only on reading. He then shows her several tools, explaining that they now belong to her so that she can begin performing magic. She looks at the drawing tools in amazement, but when she picks up the pen, she suddenly feels fear. However, that fear also serves as a source of motivation, pushing her to study as hard as she can. With determination, she faces her lessons for the day. It does not take very long for Coco to become overwhelmed with all the information, so Kefri suggests taking a break, but Coco insists on continuing. To make sure that Coco is still absorbing the information, Kefri asks her to recite what she has just learned. They had covered the basics of casting seals, and she manages to explain their three main parts, with the center portion determining what element is being used. She also recalls how the size of the casting seal can determine the strength of the spell. Lastly, the spell is activated once the outer circle is completed. After reciting everything, she suddenly feels overloaded, but Kefri feels proud of her because she managed to explain the concepts clearly. Later, she tries her hand at drawing a casting seal, and Kefri becomes excited to see her give it a try. However, as she scribbles on the paper, instead of showing her work to Kefri, she quickly crumples it in frustration. Kefri manages to retrieve the paper so he can see how she did, but Coco insists that her drawing is really poor. Kefri gently tells her that it is normal to struggle when starting out. He then shows her that she forgot to close the circle, which is necessary to activate the spell. To encourage her, he explains that it is normal to have unsteady hands when handling new tools. Kefri encourages Coco to complete the circle. Coco hesitantly does so, which suddenly sends a strong sprout of water toward Agate, causing both Kefri and Coco to panic as Agate slowly turns to stare at them. Coco panics upon seeing that her spell drenched Agate's papers, and she quickly tries to dry them. However, Agate reassures them that she is not bothered and calmly takes a closer look at Coco's casting seal. She points out that one of the symbols is clearly longer than the others, which caused the water to gush out more strongly in one direction. Kefri praises Agate for her sharp observation and then announces that he will be placing Coco under her care for the time being. Coco becomes confused as Kefri begins preparing to leave. He explains that he will be gone for 3 days because he needs to visit the Great Hall. Coco feels hesitant about being left behind, but Kefri reassures her that she should take this opportunity to learn from her peers. After he leaves, Coco returns to the room to apologize once again. However, Agat stops her and reminds Coco about the test she issued the previous night, informing her that it starts now. One stormy day, Kefri arrives at a structure that leads down to the seabed. He travels downward using magic, but is suddenly pulled to the ground by his friend Alira, who immediately scolds him for not using the stairwell like everyone else. She helps Kefri back to his feet, and the two begin talking about Coco and how Alira believes she might be the connection Kefri needs to the brim caps. Alira reminds Kefri how important Coco could be, but Kefri shares that since Coco has yet to take the test, she is not officially his apprentice. She also cannot take the test easily because the data range is very dangerous at this time of year. Back in Kefri's atelier, Agot is already opening the portal to the range, even though Coco is hesitant since Kefri is not around. Agot tells her that she will be taking the test regardless of whether Kefri is present. She explains that the test is essential for apprentices and that in her own case, she passed it when she was only 10 years old. Agot explains that the first test is called the Consent of the Crown. For the test, Coco can only bring 3 items, plus her magical components. All she needs to do is reach the summit of the data range and pick the diadem herb. Agot then hands Coco a guidance orb and a water vapor, knowing that those are the only tools Coco is currently familiar with. She activates the window, opening a portal that leads to the test grounds, but Coco nervously asks if she can also take the shoes, since she knows they are magical tools as well. She expresses her eagerness to try them, but when Agot remains silent, Coco quickly withdraws her request. Agot removes her own shoes and hands them to Coco. Before Coco can react, Agot pushes her into the portal and firmly tells her that she can only take the test once. If she fails, she will not be allowed to become Kefri's apprentice and will have to leave the atelier. Agot then closes the portal, leaving Coco alone. Little frightened, Coco gathers her courage and convinces herself to start moving forward. She lifts the guidance orb and notices that when she points it in a certain direction, the small stick inside begins tapping against the glass. The path ahead looks intimidating, but she pushes forward, only to trip on the uneven ground. She quickly gets back up, forcing herself to continue, reminding herself that Agot had managed to pass the test when she was young. She continues walking, misstepping several times, but she refuses to let anything discourage her. Eventually, she reaches the data range and is shocked by the floating spheres of forest rising high into the sky. She quickly realizes that she needs to travel across those floating spheres and reach the very top to harvest the herb. She sits down for a moment to think of a solution, but seeing a bird flying in the distance suddenly reminds her of Agot's shoes. She tries to activate them, but nothing happens, and a sudden gust of wind knocks her down. She carefully studies the casting seal on the shoes, noticing that the circle is split into 2. She remembers that to activate a spell, the circle must be complete. So she stands up and carefully tries to align the 2 halves of the circle. The spell activates and she is suddenly pushed into the air. However, she quickly loses her balance and falls back to the ground. She looks up at the bird again and realizes that despite falling, she actually managed to fly for a moment. She stands once more, feeling more confident that she can do it, but when she tries again, she moves forward briefly before falling back to the ground. She remembers Kefri telling her that she simply needs time to get used to doing magic, so she decides to practice slowly, lifting herself only slightly off the ground. Meanwhile, at the Great Hall, Kefri is busy completing paperwork while Lyra watches nearby. Lyra reminds him that he should consider moving closer to the Great Hall so he will not have to travel such long distances for simple requests. After all, the Great Hall contains everything a witch could possibly need. Kefri calmly responds that that is precisely why he only travels there when necessary. Lyra quickly realizes that Kefri truly dislikes the Great Hall, so she changes the subject and tells him to take good care of his apprentices, reminding him that children can get into all sorts of trouble when left unsupervised. Back at the data range, Coco begins to feel that her balance is improving as she slowly flies higher. She attempts to land on one of the floating spheres but misses her mark and begins losing control. Desperate not to fall back to the ground, she manages to grab onto a hanging vine from the next floating sphere and clings to it tightly. As she hangs there, she suddenly notices a strange long white creature also dangling from the vines nearby. The creature slowly slides toward her, and she panics when its tail suddenly hits her face, causing her to lose her grip on the vine. She desperately tries to float again, but instead falls into the lake below. Upon taking a closer look, she realizes that the strange creature is actually a brush buddy. The 2 of them climb out of the lake and begin drying themselves off. As Coco wipes the mud from the shoes, she suddenly notices that the casting seal on them has partially washed away. She panics and considers redrawing the circle. However, when she checks her tools, she realizes that her ink has completely spilled. As the sun begins to set, she realizes that she is running out of time. She worries that she might have to give up on becoming Kefri's apprentice. Back at the atelier, Tetia asks Agot about Coco, since she has not seen her all day. Agot casually mentions that Coco went to take the apprentice test, which immediately causes Tetia to panic since Coco barely knows any magic. Agot calmly explains that all of them took the test shortly after arriving at the atelier. She then adds that she personally believes Coco does not deserve to be an apprentice and that she still sees Coco as an outsider who will not benefit their group. Agot tells Tetia not to worry because Coco will return soon after failing. She explains that the data range is at its most dangerous this year, and since Coco does not fully understand the rules of the test or have strong magical skills, her failure is almost guaranteed. At the dinner table, Tetia feels worried and saddened by the situation. When Richie shows little concern for Coco, Tetia feels even worse. Richie calmly reasons that there is nothing they can do except wait for Kefri. Back at the data range, Coco tries to reach the lowest floating sphere without using magic. She had attempted to redraw the casting seal earlier, but the ink only smudged and spread because the material was still damp. She briefly considers drawing the seal directly on her own skin, but quickly stops herself when she remembers that doing so would count as forbidden magic. Exhausted, she wonders what else she can do. Slowly, doubt begins to creep into her thoughts. She starts believing that Agot may have been right about her, and that there is much more to magic than simply drawing spells. She begins to fear that she may not be special enough to become a witch after all. Unlike Kefri's other students, they have been learning magic since they were very young. Suddenly, a memory surfaces in her mind. She remembers the first time her mother allowed her to draw guiding lines for cutting fabric. Her mother had made her practice every single day, patiently guiding her until Coco became confident enough to work on her own. She then remembers how Kefri once described her cutting skills as something close to magic. If Kefri believes she could do magic, then she must have what it takes. A new idea suddenly forms in her mind. She begins searching the forest for something she can use to draw with. She returns to the boat and moves toward the center of the lake, preparing her tools. She notices that her cloak is dried enough to draw on, so she decides to use it as her canvas. As she begins drawing, she remembers what her mother taught her about working with fabric and what Kefri said about learning to use new tools. That is why she chooses cloth, because it is a material she already understands. She also uses a sharp rock to press against the fabric, helping to steady her lines. As she works, she begins to feel calm and focused because this is something familiar to her. By the time morning arrives, she has finally completed her casting seal. She carefully fastens the cloth to the boat, turning it into a makeshift sail. She looks at her work and knows that it is far from perfect, but that imperfection was intentional. She deliberately made one line longer than the others, knowing that doing so would strengthen the output on one side. For some reason, the brush buddy appears excited and begins moving around her. She closes the circle, activating the spell. Suddenly, the wind around her becomes wild and unstable, and she finds herself struggling to control the magic while trying to keep the boat from breaking apart. She tightly grips the sail as it suddenly detaches from the boat, launching her high into the air. Despite struggling at first, she slowly manages to steady herself and maintain her balance while flying. When she finally realizes that she is flying properly, she feels a burst of joy and pride, realizing that she has successfully created her own spell. She glances down at the world below and is reminded of her home. She never imagined that her experience with drawing on fabric would one day lead her to learning magic. A strong sense of determination fills her heart. She realizes that the herb she needs is located much higher, so she points her sail upward and begins flying toward the sky. Soon she spots a floating sphere with a diadem herb growing on top. She quickly dives toward it, attempting to grab the plant, but she overshoots the sphere. She tries again, but misses once more since she is still flying too high to properly reach the herb. She attempts the maneuver several more times, repeatedly failing to harvest the plant. Her growing frustration causes her to lose focus and she nearly crashes into a nearby sphere. She quickly steadies herself, determined not to give up. As she approaches the sphere again, she reminds herself why she started learning magic in the first place. She is doing this to save her mother. This time, she attempts something much riskier. She flips her body upside down while flying, stretching her arm downward toward the plant. Kefri returns to the atelier and is horrified to learn that Coco is currently taking the test. Without hesitation, he decides to rescue her immediately, even if it means she will fail the exam. Agot watches as Kefri rushes to open the portal. However, the moment the portal opens, everyone freezes in shock. Coco is already walking toward them, with the diadem herb firmly in hand. Tetia is the first to rush forward and hug her in relief. Coco then walks toward Agot and proudly shows that she successfully harvested the herb. Agot quietly turns away without saying a word. Instead of celebrating, Kefri's tone becomes serious as he sternly addresses the danger of taking the test without proper knowledge of the fundamentals. Coco immediately apologizes. After a moment, Kefri's expression softens. He tells Coco that there was never a need for her to prove herself because he had already accepted her as his apprentice. He then hands her a bag. When Coco opens it, her eyes widen with joy as she realizes what is inside. Carefully and respectfully, she begins putting on the witch's robe. Kefri explains the importance of the attire, especially the hat, which serves as proof that she is now an official witch apprentice. A deep sense of happiness fills Coco's heart because becoming a witch has always been her dream. They decide to head back upstairs. Since Coco is exhausted and hungry, Tatia quickly suggests that they eat breakfast first. The girls happily head up the stairs together. None of them realizes that, in the Dada range, a member of the Brim Caps was there. One day during his class, Kefri explains that despite the different kinds of magic, there are 4 sigils that are important and constantly used by witches. The sigil of water is the source of all life. The sigil of earth enables transformation and movement. The sigil of levitation allows one to travel distances on the wind. And the sigil of fire has been humanity's sword and shield since the beginning of time. The 4 sigils are called the primary tetrad, which Coco will be practicing. She practices diligently together with Tetia, who seems to finish her training earlier than Coco. While working on her casting seals, Coco accidentally sets one on fire and Tetia helps put it out with water vapor. Coco thanks her and explains that she was practicing the Pyreball spell to help with levitation training. Kefri walks over to help dry Coco, reminding her to be careful when using fire-based spells since they are often formless and can cause injuries. Tetia wonders why Coco needs to practice levitation, since she seemed proficient with it at the Dada range. Coco explains that she was hoping to fix the shoes she borrowed from Agot because she ruined them during the test. For the most part, the shoes are already fixed. She only needs to redraw the casting seal, which she keeps messing up since her lines are never straight. Kefri picks up the pen and wonders if that's the problem, so he suggests they go to the magic stationer so Coco can pick one for herself, which excites Tetia. Kefri explains that it's a shop that sells magical goods, and the idea of going to an actual magical shop excites Coco. Kefri and his students fly toward the town with the magic stationer's shop. The town is called Khan, a small island by the sandbar, and it is the closest witches' town near the atelier. When they land, Coco is amazed to see so many witches in one area. Kefri tells his students that the small island helps protect the town from the monster that live in the marshwoods. Kefri gets so into his explanation that he doesn't notice Coco isn't even paying attention to him. Agot tells the group that she will wander around by herself since she wants to do something, which Kefri allows as long as she heads to the magic stationer's shop afterward to meet up. When Kefri asks Coco how things are with Agot, she only shares that she hopes to become closer to her. They walk through the marketplace where Coco keeps getting distracted by all the different items. Suddenly, as she passes an alley, she feels a strange pull and freezes to look at it. Tetia snaps her out of it, and she hurries to keep up with the group. Kefri leads them to a shop called Starry Sword. When they enter the shop, Coco is shocked to see a tree growing right at the center. Nonoa, the shopkeeper, is surprised that Coco seems so awestruck by a silverwood tree, since it is something most witches are familiar with. Kefri steps forward and asks Nonoa to be more understanding, explaining that Coco is a new apprentice. Nonoa then realizes that Coco is the rumored outsider apprentice and laughs at his mistake for not considering who she might be. Tetia hugs Coco from behind and introduces Nonoa as the owner of the shop. Nonoa proudly says that all the magical components in the shop were crafted by him and his grandson Tarta. He even boasts that he can extract conjuring ink at whatever concentration people want. When it becomes clear that Coco doesn't understand what he is saying, Nonoa asks her to follow him. As she travels up the stairs, the sound of carving becomes clearer until she sees a boy, Tarta, crafting a pen on one of the upper floors. When they reach the very top, Nonoa cuts a branch from the silverwood tree and submerges part of it in a flask. The water suddenly turns black, and Kefri explains that it is called woodcrore. Nonoa tells her that the black branches are dead parts of the tree, and that the substance is poisonous to both the tree and humans. However, when dissolved in water, filtered, and extracted, it becomes conjuring ink, the source of magic. Kefri explains that regular ink is made from soot, but conjuring ink is made from crore, or the blood of the tree. Silverwood trees are very important to witches since they are the only source of conjuring ink. Nonoa tells Coco the old story of how a silverwood tree fell in love with a witch. As a gift, it offered its blood for ink and its branches for wands. Coco reacts to the word wand, which makes Nonoa chuckle as he guesses that she came to the shop looking for one. Coco confirms his guess, so he pours some ink into a container and tells her to try some of the wands available in the shop. When he hands her the ink, he expresses his confidence that the shop contains the perfect wand for her. When they head back to the main shop to try the wands, Coco suddenly sees Iguine by the window. She bursts out of the shop to confront him, but he is already darting away. She runs after him, causing Tetia and Richie to worry that she might get lost, so they decide to follow her. Coco ends up running past Agot, who is shocked to see her. Tetia and Richie stop where Agot is and pull her along to follow Coco. Coco does her best to keep Iguine in sight as he weaves through the streets and alleys to shake her off. She continues chasing him. while close behind her are the other girls and the brush buddy, who is eventually unable to follow due to a thick fog suddenly covering the alleys they entered. The fog eventually clears and the brush buddy moves forward, only to realize it has lost sight of Coco and the others. Meanwhile, Agot finally catches up to Coco and demands to know why she suddenly took off. Coco explains that she is following the person who gave her the forbidden magic book, but when she turns to look for him, he is nowhere to be seen. Tetia suggests they head back, but then Richie notices that the scenery is strange and that they might not be in town anymore. Agot studies the area as well, noting that the walls and road are made of a different kind of stone not used in Khan. Tetia doesn't believe it, since they didn't pass through a windowway or use teleportation. She decides to fly up to see where they are, but Agot begins to suspect that teleportation may actually be the case. The girls suddenly realize that they might have been brought there through forbidden magic. Tetia returns in a panic and tells them they need to leave immediately because they are no longer in Khan. As Tetia tries to lead them away, she explains that something saw her. Igumim watches them as a dragon appears before the girls. He wickedly welcomes Coco to the world of magic and describes her as their hope. Back in Starry Sword, Kefri notices that the girls are missing and asks Nolnoa if he knows where they went. Nolnoa guesses that they went for a walk because they got bored, which somehow hurts Kefri, as he thinks it's impossible to get bored in the shop. Kefri also mentions that his apprentices are not the type to wander off without thanking Nolnoa first, leading him to believe something else is going on. Tarta tells them that the girls ran out of the shop when a strangely dressed witch appeared by the window. He mentions that the witch was wearing a mask that looked like an eyeball, making Kefri realize that the girls are in danger. Back with Coco and the others, the dragon notices them and looks as if it is preparing to attack. The girls freeze in shock. Agot instructs them to maintain eye contact and back away very slowly. When she believes they are far enough, she will tell them to run, and they must do so with all their strength. Coco agrees with the plan, and the girls begin backing away as Agot instructs. Agot stays closest to the dragon, and once she decides they have enough distance, she tells them to run. The moment she does, the dragon lunges and begins chasing them. When it gets too close to them, Agot manages to fend it off by using a fire spell she drew in her palm choir. She tells the girls to run while the dragon is struggling to recover. As they run away from the creature, Coco praises Agot for the amazing spell, believing she managed to draw it quickly. Agot explains it's a combination of fire and wind sigils, and it was already drawn in advance in her palm choir. All she needed to do to activate the spell was to close the ring. Coco continues to praise her quick thinking, momentarily forgetting the danger they are in. The girls reach a dead end and consider taking another path, but they notice the dragon searching for them nearby. The reality that they might be goners suddenly hits Tetia. She agonizes over how she has left so little impact on the world as a witch and begins to regret certain choices, which makes Coco realize that Tetia regrets running after her. Agot stays by Tetia's side and tells her to calm down. She reassures Tetia that, as witch apprentices, they will be able to find a way back using their magic. Agot tells them they can use a wall breaker spell to clear an escape route, but she needs time to draw it since it needs to be large. She instructs Tetia and Richie to distract the dragon long enough for her to make the casting seal. Coco hangs back, remembering how Tetia had looked at her earlier. She understood right away that Tetia blamed her for the situation. She feels alone again, but she doesn't blame Tetia because she believes Tetia is right. Tetia draws a wind spell, which she fixes into her witch's garb that she sheds off. It flies into the air, and she hopes the dragon will go after it, believing it is one of them. To their relief, the decoy works and Agot begins working while Coco is amazed that Tetia managed to distract the dragon. While watching the dragon, Coco notices something by the wall near it, and as she focuses on it, she recognizes it as a casting seal. She tries to get Agot's attention by touching her, but this causes Agot to mess up one of the lines. Agot is furious and immediately scolds Coco for ruining possibly their only way out. Coco tries to apologize, mentioning she never meant to do anything bad, but Agot snaps at her, saying Coco never means anything bad, and it doesn't change the fact that many things are her fault, such as turning her mother into stone or getting them all into trouble. She tells Coco she is better off not doing anything. Tetia feels the tension grow and tries to refocus Agot on thinking of another way out. However, Richie is the one who manages to complete the spell by creating several small wall breaker spells to form a bigger hole instead of the large casting seal that Agot had attempted earlier. Agot praises her quick thinking and encourages the girls to finally escape from the dead end. She meant the physical dead end, but she remarks that Coco can also take it as them no longer wanting to associate with her. Tetia gives Coco a worried glance before eventually following Agot. Coco steps forward and picks up Tetia's hat, wondering how Kefri will resolve this. Meanwhile, Kefri has been searching with Nolnoa and Tarta for the girls since learning that the brim caps are behind their disappearance. Tarta remembers seeing Coco run after the mysterious witch from his window, but it never crossed his mind that the strange witch was a brim cap. Even Nolnoa is surprised that one of their members would come to a witch's town. Kefri briefly explains that they are identified by wearing hats and masks from the bygone era of magic. Part of the reason he took Coco in was that he believed she could provide him a clue on how to find them, but he didn't think the brim caps would actually be after her. He tries to ask Tarda if he remembers anything else, but Tarda apologizes because he has no more leads. Coco's brush buddy then tugs on Kefri's clothes and he recognizes it immediately. He asks if the brush buddy knows where the girls are, and the brush buddy begins pointing and heading in the direction where he last saw them. Kefri follows the brush buddy, realizing how late it has become. He desperately hopes that all the girls are still safe. Eventually, the dragon discovers the girls' trick and starts chasing them. The girls have been running around in circles and find themselves back at the hole that Richie had made for them earlier. Ago tells them it's best that they search for a place to take shelter for now, since the temperature is dropping. The girls manage to find a covered part of the maze that gives them some shelter. As they rest, Coco takes the opportunity to return Tetia's hat and apologize. Coco then insists that Tetia wear her cloak for warmth, while she snuggles up to her for warmth. Tetia curiously looks at Coco, who admits that the cloak makes her feel safe. She shares that the cloak hides her form well, so no one can actually tell when she's shaking with fear. On the outside, people will think she's a brave witch and she can draw power from that belief. Coco hopes she can share some of that courage with Tetia because she believes Tetia will be more useful given their situation. Overwhelmed with emotion, Tetia activates a spell that envelops her and Coco in a puff of cloud. Coco is shocked by the warmth of the cloud when Tetia appears before her. Tetia apologizes for looking at her scornfully earlier. The memory of how she looked at Coco is still fresh in their minds. Though Coco insists that it's fine, Tetia still feels regret over her actions. She acknowledges that she shouldn't have reacted like that and that she should be the one protecting Coco since Tetia has been a witch longer. Coco tries to tell Tetia that she is protecting her. She hugs a bunch of the clouds, explaining how they make her feel warm and protected. Tetia smiles and shares that this spell is her own creation. When she was younger, she used to dream about sleeping on a cloud. As it is, the spell is still incomplete, but once she perfects it, she plans to submit it as a general-use spell to the council. She places Coco's cloak back on Coco, insisting that she should wear it, and encourages Coco that they should all return home together and become full-fledged witches. The soft moment is then interrupted by both Agot and Richie, since they actually heard the entire conversation and wanted a bit of the warmth from the cloud. Agot points out the spell's problems before getting the girls back on track about their situation. Agot believes the entire area is influenced by a spell, which is why it always seems like they aren't making progress in their escape. She mentions that even forbidden magic still needs casting seals to activate, so they need to find the area's casting seal to escape. Coco finally raises her hand and admits that she thinks she saw the casting seal earlier. She directs the girls to where it is visible, and all the girls confirm that it looks like the casting seal. They also notice that the dragon appears to have grown, so there might be an area effect causing it to grow. Agot concludes that they need to defeat the dragon in order to get to the casting seal and is about to suggest using fire spells, though Coco shyly interjects that she believes it won't work. Agot is a little put off by her comment, but after hearing Coco's observation, she cannot deny that Coco might actually have a point. Coco proposes that they don't actually beat the dragon, which angers Agot. Coco tries to explain that Tetia and Agot actually gave her an idea she would like to try out. They return to the area where they were resting, and Coco draws out her plan for them. She explains that she wants to make a cloud bed for the dragon. She believes that it might be comfortable enough that the dragon could potentially no longer want to fight them in favor of resting. Agot is about to protest, but Richie thinks it's a great idea since she believes in the power of a comfortable bed. Even Tetia is on board with using her spell for the plan. Coco runs up to an area where she can get a better view of the dragon. She tells the girls that she is actually worried about the dragon because it crashed nose first into a wall earlier, which means the dragon might be injured, which is why she thought of the plan. She tells the girls that Kefri once told her that magic can bring happiness to people, so she hopes that the dragon will experience kinder magic from them. Tetia and Richie try to convince Agot that this is the best plan they have so far so she can help out. They admit that among them, Agot is the best at drawing seals, so her contribution will improve the odds. Agot finds herself agreeing with her fellow apprentices, which causes Coco to nearly stumble down the stairs out of excitement. They hold a strategy meeting to complete Tetia's spell since it isn't strong enough to retain its form yet. The girls need to figure out a material that can withstand the dragon's weight while still feeling cloud-like. Tetia suggests paper, but they don't have enough materials to produce sufficient amounts. Coco and Richie suggest their clothes or hair, and Agot points out the same problem. Agot then thinks that sand might be the answer. Agot remembers that when they made the wall breaker spell, sand was left behind. She tells Richie that they need to make the casting seals smaller to produce finer sand, and Richie begins drawing several seals right away. Tetia needs to come up with a spell that can help them gather the sand in the central plaza, while Agot tasks herself with making an enveloping spell to keep it in place. Coco tries to ask for a job as well, but Agot refuses to give her one. She admits that Coco's plan is good, but Coco isn't at a skill level that Agot can trust with the spell. As time ticks by, Coco picks up one of Agot's discarded casting seals and notices that her circles are perfect. She wonders how Agot manages to do it, so she moves closer to get a better look. She notices that Agot draws the circle in the air a few times before letting the pen hit the paper. She wonders if Richie and Tetia do the same, and when she looks, they all have a similar technique. She realizes she never thought about those details before, so she takes out her notes and pen, suddenly feeling the urge to practice. She steadies her hand and begins to practice drawing. Soon night falls and the dragon becomes restless. The girls notice the temperature drop and wonder how they can keep warm, while Agot admits she is having a hard time thinking of a possible enveloping spell. Tetia and Richie begin throwing out ideas, but Agot rejects them all. Suddenly, a light shines to the side and they notice that Coco has successfully made a fireball spell. Tetia and Richie are the first to congratulate Coco. Unlike her previous attempts, her spell is finally stable. Coco shows them that she was just practicing while the girls were busy with their own spells. Agot tries to calm the girls, mentioning that anyone can do it with enough repetition, which makes her realize something. She tells the girls her plan, and by morning they are ready to execute it. They run across the roofs while the dragon does not notice them yet, since they need to get into position to draw their spells. Coco and Tetia travel to one end of the maze, while Agot and Richie take the other. Agot notices that the dragon has grown in size, so they really need to make their escape now, otherwise it will be too dangerous for them. Once arriving in their area, the girls begin drawing their casting circles on the ground. When Tetia finishes her preparation, Coco gives a signal to Richie, who signals back that they have also completed theirs. Agot tells Richie to signal them to close the circle at the same time. On the third wave of their hats, both casting circles are closed, activating the spell. They then move on to the other stations where Tetia and Richie are able to close several other circles due to their sylph shoes. The sand begins forming into fluffy clouds on the ground. Agot had managed to figure out a trick to retain the sand's form through the use of the repetition spell. This way, no matter how many times it gets displaced, it will always attempt to return to its original form, mimicking how a cloud acts. The dragon tests the cloud with its paws and after a few seconds decides to lie on it with its full weight. The girls cheer since this means their plan is successful. And while the three girls want to name the spell the dragon Disabler Cushion, Agot decides a better name would be Serpent's Bed of Sand. The girls all agree that it's the better name and begin heading to the area's casting seal. Tetia hangs back a bit to look at the dragon. She tells Coco that it's the first time a spell she made has made someone look so happy. Even though it's a dragon, she feels happy and fulfilled that her magic brought comfort to it. The girls manage to reach the casting seal, but none of them can determine what type of seal it is. Meanwhile, Kiefer is searching the area where the brush buddy had brought him. He doesn't sense anything, so he wonders if the girls were moved somewhere. Tarta notices sand on the pavement, which he finds odd because there shouldn't be any in this area. Kiefer notices the brush buddy sniffing at a stone and picks it up to see parts of a seal. It suddenly activates and Kiefer has to keep himself and Tarta safe from the sudden wave of magical energy. When Tarta is out of the way, Kiefer faces the spell head-on. Back with the students, their entire area suddenly becomes unstable due to the attempt they made to destroy the circle. Coco notices that the sky is opening up, which could mean their way out. However, Agot pushes her down because the dragon is starting to attack them again. In Agot's attempt to save Coco, she is the one who ends up taking the fall for her. She thinks this might be the end, but Kiefer suddenly catches her and darts away from the dragon. The dragon's attacks are now focused on both of them, and Kiefer begins climbing an altitude. He instructs Agot to hold on tight since he needs his hands to draw a spell. At a certain height, he closes a circle, which opens up the rest of the sky in the area where they were trapped. The clouds he cleared become water vapor, which he then forms into a dragon. Kiefer's water dragon is much bigger than the one that was attacking them, so it completely engulfs the smaller dragon and sends itself crashing to the ground in waves. The water completely submerges the maze and the dragon floats up unconscious. Since it is now safe, Tetia and Richie fly toward Kiefer, and all of them are relieved to be reunited, until Kiefer notices that Coco is missing. Coco has been captured by Egwene and is unconscious. Egwene is pleased to meet her again after many years. He admits that the maze and the dragon were a test to aid in her growth. Egwene decides that he will give her another present, magic that Kiefer cannot teach her, then sends Coco back to the maze. When Coco regains consciousness, she sees Kiefer and everyone looking at her. She struggles to sit up, but immediately looks for Agot, who is nearby. Coco feels relieved seeing that Agot and everyone are safe, then realizes they are no longer in the maze. Kiefer explains that he found her unconscious by the stairs and notices a faraway look in Coco's eyes, which makes him think the brimmed caps must have had contact with her, though she denies it. She then looks at everyone and notices how tattered their garbs are. She's overwhelmed with guilt over her actions and apologizes for endangering them. Kiefer suddenly gets up and tells Coco that Tetia told him what happened. Instead of scolding Coco, Kiefer praises her for her ideas, mentioning how important thinking is just as much as drawing and casting. He wants to nurture Coco's talent as much as possible. Coco, though tearful, finally smiles and the girls celebrate their win for the day. Nolno arrives, pleased to see everyone are safe, but Kiefer tells him to study the ink in the forbidden casting seal. He also tells Nolnoa not to tell the Knight Morales about the incident. Nolnoa is about to decline, but Kiefer fixes him with a frightening gaze that stuns Nolnoa into silence. When Nolnoa snaps out of his fear, he senses that something important is about to happen. One day in the atelier, Ago and Coco are busy studying in their room. As Ago prepares her spells, she keeps getting distracted by every noise Coco tends to make. Eventually, Ago heads out, and Coco wonders if she's being too loud for her. Ago goes to the clearing and tries to concentrate. She manages to draw the weak light spell with her eyes closed. At first, Ago isn't too pleased with the result, but it ends up attracting a bird. The spell eventually expires, causing the bird to fly away. Back in the atelier, Coco has moved on to practicing drawing spells. Her lines are still shaky, and she sighs because she was unable to choose a pen of her own when they went to Con. She can draw clean lines with pigment stones, but that doesn't work for drawing spells in her palm choir. She lies down to think about her situation again. She still can't perform many spells, but Kiefer had once praised her for her ideas. She quickly shakes the thought away, reminding herself that she cannot give up on magic and needs to keep practicing. She lets out a small shout to pump herself up to continue drawing, but she ends up feeling sleepy from all the reading she did earlier. However, instead of landing on the floor, she falls on a Kiefer, who warns her that she will catch a cold if she sleeps there. Coco quickly tries to explain that she had no intention of sleeping. She then admits that her progress feels slow and she doubts whether she can pass the trial of the Toms and find the picture book that the brimmed caps gave her. She catches herself spiraling and tries to say something more positive, telling Kiefer that she will do her best and that she truly loves magic. Kiefer stops her by placing a book on her head and asks her to follow him. He leads her to the kitchen and Coco becomes curious because it smells delicious. Kiefer takes a pot from the shelf and opens it, revealing a stew. He invites Coco to try a little. She takes a bite and is instantly overjoyed by how good it tastes. As she does a small happy dance, Kiefer casually mentions that he made the stew 2 years ago. He reassures her not to worry about it being spoiled because there is a spell on the lid that keeps rewinding time to when it was still fresh. However, he does need to redraw it occasionally to maintain its quality. He then places hard potatoes on the table and asks Coco if she can cook them, since she recently learned how to perform the Fireball spell. With careful precision, Coco draws the seal perfectly. However, when she places the potato over the flame, it does not float and simply drops back to the ground. Kiefer explains that since the potatoes are heavy, she needs to extend the levitation line. She tries again, but now the flame does not reach the potato. She adjusts the strength of the flame, but it becomes too strong and ends up burning both the potato and the paper. Kiefer does not discourage her and gently tells her to keep trying. Coco continues practicing, and after several failed attempts, she finally manages to draw a seal that successfully cooks the potato. The potato roasts inside the flame and Coco carefully removes it just in time. When Kiefer cuts it open to check, he comments that it is cooked perfectly. Coco feels proud of herself and Kiefer asks if she is still feeling sleepy. He then decides to tell her a story about how he mastered water magic. He admits that he was never a good swimmer and that he mainly wanted to avoid water because he disliked getting soaked. So he practiced constantly, learning how to control water so he wouldn't get soaked whenever it was his turn to wash the dishes. He explains that making magic part of everyday life is the best way to learn. He adds that cooking is a great way to practice since it results in something useful and enjoyable. Unable to resist the smell of the food, Tetia and Richie soon find their way into the kitchen. When they see Coco helping out, they offer to help as well. However, Kiefer apologizes and explains that for today, he would like Coco to handle the parts of the meal that require magic. Kiefer and his students begin preparing the meal together. Tetia and Richie take care of the smaller tasks, while Coco handles anything that requires fire spells. Soon she finishes preparing all the food and everyone agrees that it looks appetizing. Coco suddenly suggests that they eat outside and everyone seems to like the idea. As Kiefer heads off to prepare the rest of the picnic items, Agot returns. Coco invites her to join them. Agot declines, saying she would rather eat while she works. She also points out that having a picnic right now might not be a good idea. The three girls head to the door to check, and to their disappointment, it is raining outside. They begin to think that the picnic will not happen, especially since Kiefer dislikes getting soaked. However, Kifri suddenly appears behind them and tells them there is no reason to be sad. He steps forward, and the girls are amazed to see that the rain does not touch him or the space around him. He reminds them that they are witches and they can use magic. The girls brighten up and quickly follow Kifri, carrying their food and picnic items. They walk all the way to a bridge and decide to have their picnic underneath it. Everyone enjoys the food that Coco and Kifri prepared, including the brush buddy that have followed Coco home. They have such a good time that they lose track of time. When they finish eating, the clouds begin to part, revealing the sunlight. Something clicks in Coco, and she suddenly heads away from the bridge. She tells the others that she's going to get Aga because she wants to show her the beautiful scenery. However, when she reaches the atelier, she sees Olrubio, Kifri's friend, stepping out. Olrubio questions Coco's presence in the atelier. Kifri soon arrives, intending to warn Coco about the approaching storm, but he is surprised to see Olrubio there. Coco quickly hides behind Kifri's cloak and tells Olrubio that she is one of Kifri's apprentices. Olrubio looks annoyed that Kifri took in another apprentice without informing him. Kifri tries to explain that Coco's case is special due to her involvement with forbidden magic. At the mention of forbidden magic, Olrubio immediately grabs Coco and pulls her away from Kifri. He tells Kifri that he does not want to be involved with the brim caps and that he intends to hand Coco over to the Knights Morales. As they move further away, Kifri uses his magic to block Olrubio's path. He firmly tells him that he does not care if they are friends. He will not allow Coco to be taken away. Olrubio is surprised that Coco is important enough for Kifri to use magic against him, so he agrees to listen. Soon, even Tetia and Richie are back home, drying off and aware that there is a storm both inside and outside their home. In another room, Kifri finishes explaining the situation. Olrubio apologizes to Coco for his earlier actions and for calling her an outsider. Kifri properly introduces Coco to Olrubio as the atelier's watchful eye. He explains that small ateliers like theirs require another witch to oversee them and report to the Great Hall for a misconduct. Olrubio complains that Kifri always makes him keep secrets. Kifri reasoned that this time it was the best option. If he had erased Coco's memories, any leads to the brim caps and their forbidden magic would have been lost. Olrubio argues that investigating forbidden magic is not part of their responsibility and that they should leave it to the Knights Morales. Coco looks uneasy, so Kifri explains who the Knights Morales are. He says they are a group that strictly enforces the conditions of the Day of the Pact. They erase the memories of those who use forbidden magic as well as those who learn about magic. Kifri then tells Olrubio that if they hand Coco over to the Knights Morales, even her love for magic will be erased. He places a hand on Coco's shoulder and explains that she is a good child who loves her mother and works hard. He also emphasizes how much she loves magic. Kifri admits that Coco learning about magic was his fault, and if her memories were to be erased, then his should be as well. This causes Olrubio to reconsider. Olrubio then points toward Tetia and Richie, who were eavesdropping, and remarks that he thought Kifri had finally given up his search for the brim caps when he took on apprentices. Clicking his tongue, he tells Kifri that he can do as he pleases, but if the situation worsens, he will report him to the Great Hall. When Coco looks worried, Kifri reassures her, reminding her that she is rightfully his apprentice since she passed the test. He then tells the girls to take a warm bath before going to bed so they won't catch a cold. After her bath, Coco searches the atelier for her brush buddy. She catches a glimpse of it and follows it until it enters Olrubio's room. Coco panics because she is too scared to go inside and retrieve it. She gathers her courage and approaches Olrubio's door, but stops when she reads a warning that says she will be cursed if she knocks. Instead, she opens the door and tries to call her brush buddy from the doorway. However, she sneezes loudly and Olrubio catches her in the act with the brush buddy already in his hands. He floats down and hands her the brush buddy, whose fur is surprisingly dry. He then activates the seal on his rings, instantly drying Coco's hair as well. He tells her that looking after her health is also part of his role. He reminds Coco not to do something like that again, though he admits it was partly his fault for leaving his door unlocked. However, Coco is too distracted by the glowing path of stone on his floor. She tells him that this is the first spell that made her fall in love with magic. Olrubio reveals that the glowstone path is his own signature work. He begins explaining how the sigil functions, but Coco is too busy trying to make as many stones light up as possible by lying across them. Olrubio is slightly surprised by how much she admires his work. Coco explains that the glowing path holds a special memory for her. It is a happy memory because when she was younger, it made her feel like she had magic. But when she walked on a normal path, it also became a sad memory because it reminded her of how ordinary she was. She presses down on one of the glowing stones again and tells him that his magic gave her a dream, and she sincerely thanks him for that. She calls him teacher, which causes a warm feeling to rise in his chest. Flustered, he urges her to leave. Coco bows one last time before finally stepping out. After she leaves, instead of locking the door like he originally intended, old Rubio leaves it slightly ajar. The next day, it is still raining. Coco decides to continue her studies in the living room and invites Agot to join her. Agot refuses, saying she prefers to study in their room. Once Coco leaves, Agot resumes her practice, but she becomes irritated by the noise of the window rattling from the wind and rain. For some reason, it feels even louder than Coco, and it disrupts her concentration. She takes a deep breath and tries to calm herself, telling herself that this is good practice. Closing her eyes, she begins drawing again. When she opens them, the spell activates. The stream of light is still slightly unstable, but it is noticeably better than before. She begins to feel confident that she will soon be able to complete her own spell. Suddenly, her concentration is broken when she hears someone outside the atelier calling for help. She heads out to investigate and sees Kifri speaking with someone from a nearby village. Agot approaches the other apprentices and learns that the bridge at Stairway River has been destroyed and a carriage is stranded in the middle of the river. She overhears the man urgently pleading with Kifri to hurry, explaining that his son is trapped inside the carriage. Agot feels that this is her chance to do real work. She steps forward and begs Kifri to take her with him, promising that she can finally be of help this time. In the end, Agot is allowed to go and she and old Rubio ride horseback to the site of the incident. Earlier, when she begged Kifri to take her, Kifri was hesitant because this was a situation where people's lives were on the line. He also told Agot that since she had not taken the second test yet, she was not allowed to cast magic in front of non-witches. However, Agot refused to give in. She insisted that Kifri should be more open to giving her opportunities to practice her magic because she had been practicing on her own for so long, yet he still had not given her the signal to take the exam even though she was ready for it. Dagda, the man at the door, urged Kifri to hurry, so old Rubio decided to go ahead with Dagda so he could create a window way for Kifri, giving him more time to prepare what they needed. He also offered to take Agot, who immediately got ready. The other girls decided that they would go as well and quickly prepare themselves. Old Rubio told Kifri to just let it happen since it would be a good learning experience for the girls. Kifri was still uneasy. While he knew old Rubio was correct, he worried about Agot because of her outlook on magic and the way she focused too much on her frustrations. He feared that in Agot's haste to improve herself, she might make a horrible misstep. At present, old Rubio notices how unstable the ground is as they approach the site. As they near the area, they notice the carriage is about to be swept away by the currents. The group of civilians sees old Rubio and Agot and notices that they are witches, causing them to immediately feel relieved. They shout to their companions inside the carriage that they will be saved soon. Old Rubio hands Agot 2 of his magic rings and instructs her to warn the people near them and wait for further instructions. Agot is a little disappointed that she will not be performing her own magic and asks if that is really the only thing she should do. Old Rubio confirms, highlighting that even simple tasks are important. He tells Agot that he can see why Kifri was worried about her, pointing out that she is too impatient. He reassures her that there will come a time when she can show her powers, but in a different setting. He advises Agot to use the opportunity now to see how magic can help people. However, Agot does not appreciate the advice since it sounds like old Rubio only sees her as a child. As Kifri and the other apprentices arrive through the window way, she decides that she will find a way today to prove herself as a worthy witch. The rescue operation begins and old Rubio lands on the carriage. Kifri floats above the water, now wielding Rain Cleaver. Using the magical sword, he manages to split the water before keeping it completely away from the carriage by planting the sword into the ground. The people watch in amazement as Tetia tries to keep them back. Old Rubio begins bringing people out of the carriage while Kifri struggles to hold the water back. As Kifri gets splashed by the waves, he feels his hatred of water rise, noting that this mission is not an easy one. Old Rubio notices that Kifri is having difficulty, so he rushes to get the others to safety. Once he rescues the last person, he tells Kifri that he is done, allowing Kifri to part and calm the waves carefully so the water will not suddenly rush toward the safe zone. Kifri watches the water from the air and old Rubio congratulates him as well. When both of them land on the ground, Custis, the last boy they saved, apologizes to Dagda because he was unable to save any of the cargo. However, Dagda is simply grateful that Custis is safe. He thanks the witches for rescuing them, and Kifri tells him that they can receive medical assistance from his apprentices. But he suddenly realizes he does not see where the girls are. Kifri spots them admiring Rain Cleaver, so he entertains them by explaining how he made the sword and mentions some of its capabilities. The girls are eager to try holding it, but Kifri refuses, explaining that magical weapons are still too advanced for them. Old Rubio tells Kifri that they still need to make sure everything else is safe, so he wants to check upriver for other incidents or damage. Kifri agrees and decides to check downriver instead. He tells Tetia to join him while old Rubio takes Richie, leaving Coco and Agot to make sure things remain stable in the current area. While Coco is happy to be of some help, Agot seems unsatisfied about being left behind with Coco. The two of them begin giving the victims medical attention, and Coco worries because things are still awkward with Agot. She finishes bandaging one of the men, and he thanks her, calling her Little Miss Witch, which makes Coco feel elated. Meanwhile, those who are not injured are busy doing inventory since more than half of their cargo was swept away. They then hear Dagda shout at Custis, who has decided to try retrieving one of the cargo crates stuck between some rocks in the water by the bank. He attempts to rappel toward the cargo despite Dagda telling him to come back due to how unstable the earth is. The tree Custis tied the rope to begin struggling under his weight because of the damp ground. Eventually, the tree gives way, taking a portion of the land with it. Dagda is stunned, and in his bewilderment, his feet lead him toward the collapse to look for Custis, only to be stopped by an older man and Agot. Agot then recognizes Coco's hat down in the wreckage and worries that Coco has been buried. However, Coco calls out, and Agot spots her hanging onto a chunk of earth while fighting against the current. They then notice that Custis is half buried beneath some rubble and has passed out. Dagda is devastated by the sight, but then realizes that Agot is also a witch and begs her to save Custis using magic. Agot recognizes that this is finally her chance to prove herself. Her masters are not around to stop her, and she has no way of contacting them. A small smile breaks out, but then people gather around her, curious about what kind of magic she will use to save Coco and Custis. Suddenly, Agot begins hearing other voices judging her magic and calling her ordinary for a witch from an esteemed family. She feels the pressure building up and even recognizes a clear and familiar voice telling her that they have no need for a talentless witch in the family and that she will not be continuing her apprenticeship with them. The memory fills her with anxiety and she can feel sweat build up. However, she is snapped out of it when she hears Coco call for her. Coco asks if there is anything she can do to help from her position as she struggles to hang on. Slowly, Agot crawls toward the edge, and seeing Coco's desperation to be useful, she remembers old Rugio's words to her. Agot calms herself and asks Coco to explain the situation from where she is. Coco mentions that on her side of the bank, the current is much weaker, so she believes she will not get swept away. However, she cannot climb up the rocks because the mud keeps causing her to slip. She also mentions that she can see Custis. Coco then shows Agot that her bag and supplies are completely drenched. Agot assesses the situation and realizes there are too many people around for her to openly draw any spells. Meanwhile, at the seabed, Aestes watches through a window as he is informed that a nearby village close to Khan reported seeing a massive pillar of water rise from the marshlands. Aestes immediately decides they should investigate the disturbance themselves. Back with Agot, Coco manages to climb up onto the shore and signals for Agot to hand her old Rugio's linking ring through hand gestures. Agot understands what Coco is planning and ties the rings to a branch and throws them toward Coco. Coco activates the rings and manages to dry her tools so she can cast spells again. However, Agot knows Coco will not be able to properly hide her casting because she lacks the skill to hide it from people. In order to conceal magic from ordinary people, a witch has to draw beneath their cloak through muscle memory alone, and Agot knows Coco cannot pull that off yet. However, she knows she can. Suddenly, she gets an idea with that knowledge. She calls for everyone's attention and loudly announces that she is Kefri's greatest apprentice. With everyone now focused on her, she calms herself and begins drawing beneath her cloak with practiced precision. She completes a light spell that she had been practicing, and her spell sends a stream of light soaring into the sky before it finally takes the form of a grand glowing bird. The people stare at the spell in amazement, completely distracted by the beautiful sight. Agot quietly signals to Coco to start drawing now. Coco carefully makes her way toward Custis while deciding to use the levitation spell she had recently learned. However, when she sees how massive the boulder is, she realizes she does not have enough material to make the spell powerful enough to lift it away. She notices Custis regain consciousness and quickly moves closer to him. Calmly, she introduces herself and explains the situation to him. Custis is still dazed and surprised that he survived at all. He mentions seeing a giant bird made of light and assumed he had already left for the afterlife. Coco explains that the bird is actually her friend's spell, but then suddenly realizes something about Agot's magic. Meanwhile, Agot watches her spell fly through the sky while worrying because she knows the people will only remain distracted for so long. One of the elderly merchants asks if the bird is the only spell Agot can perform. Dagda is the first to grow impatient and asks if the bird is merely a light show that cannot actually save Custis. When Agot fails to give him a direct answer, he decides to climb down himself and rescue Custis. But she is suddenly shocked when both she and Dagda see Coco floating through the air together with Custis using her cloak. Dagda quickly takes Custis into his arms while Coco struggles to control her floating cloak. Agot moves toward Coco to check on her, but Coco suddenly runs into her arms and tearfully admits how scared she was during everything. She also expresses how relieved she is that her idea worked. Agot pulls Coco away but then notices Stan covering parts of Coco's cloak. Coco explains that she used the wall breaker spell she once saw them use before. Ago immediately understands how Coco managed to remove the boulder without hurting Custis. Coco credits Agot for giving her the idea in the first place because seeing Agot's spell reminded her that she could rely on her friend's magic too. Agot quickly denies trying to help her and attempts to explain that she only used the spell as a flare. However, she notices Coco's attention fixed on Custis and Dagda instead. Coco quietly says that she is just happy they managed to save someone. Seeing the scene before her gives Coco hope that someday she may also be able to save her mother. Suddenly, both girls are captured by penance and lifted high into the air. Ago immediately recognizes the silver cloth, the scarlet cloaks, and the winged caps belonging to the uniforms of the Knights Morales. Aestes demands to know which of the girls cast the spell, warning them that he will show no mercy to anyone associated with the brim caps. Agot argues that they are not connected to the brim caps and insists that they did not use any forbidden magic. However, Aestes directs their attention downward. The girls look below and realize that the entire area has been transformed into sand while parts of the river are beginning to vaporize. Coco is stunned and mutters that she never drew a spell capable of doing something like that, but her words only convince Aestes even more that she is responsible. Having already decided her fate, Aestes prepares to erase Coco's memories. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and see what happens next.